mic. Cool. Cool. I think we all know what a resume is. Most of us do. Show of hands, who has an active resume updated? Kind of, sort of, right? Most of the room looks like they don't. Just real quick, in terms of a question, is it ever too early to have a resume? Is there ever such a thing as it's too early, maybe just wait a couple more years? I think the answer is no. It's never too early to have one. I think it's important, though, to have an understanding of what should go on a resume before you simply just create one just to have one. You don't want to make sure that you're creating it without the full understanding of, is this included? Is my Boy Scouts, should that be included? Should it not be? I volunteered. Is that included? You just want to make sure that you have a good understanding, because regardless of what age you're at, regardless of how much work experience you have, there's a good way of putting together a resume and there's a bad way of putting it together. And just because you're 30 years into your career or 1 year into high school doesn't mean that a resume is going to be any better or any worse. So experience doesn't quite equate to a good resume. Because I've been working for 10 years, I'm going to have a better resume than you. That's not necessarily true, right? It's really about understanding what's important to be included on it. And it's also really important to understand if you're going to put the time and energy into creating a resume, in order for it to really reach its full potential, you're going to have to ensure that that resume is created and crafted in a way that's personalized for the person that you plan on giving it to, or the company you plan on giving it to. It's really important to tailor resumes to kind of add an own theme to it based on the job you're applying for. So if I'm applying for a Foot Locker job, right, helping out with shoes, or if I'm applying for a job with the Boy Scouts or a camp, that resume needs to be tailored and geared towards those specific jobs. I mean, it could be as slight as an introduction of why you want the job, and then everything else is, for the most part, a regular template. But essentially, it needs to be somewhat personalized for you to have the greatest appeal. Because how am I going to differentiate my resume between Joel's if we're applying for the same job and we have very similar backgrounds? If I tailor my resume to the specific job, right, by going to the job description and having an understanding of what the job description entails, the responsibilities it includes, the terms they use. We're looking for a responsible, etc., who's good with management and inventory. Like, I'm going to use those keywords into my resume. In order for them to understand, like, hey, he's going to be really good at this job because he's actually using the same terminologies and stuff, whereas Joel may be using just a generic approach to it. So here, we'll watch this video. Again, kind of a high-end level in terms of the importance of a resume, but hopefully it's engaging. And then we'll go into details, which will be a little bit more text-heavy with the PowerPoint, and go from there. But it sounds like most of you guys have a good understanding of it. I thought there was sound, but you guys can kind of read that to follow along. Is there usually sound on this thing?
I'm not too sure. Is
Top right.
you plug it in?
Top right corner will be the.
Okay.
Focus on theory that underlies the kind of work you're interested in.
This sounds kind of whack. You guys can kind of follow. Can you follow along from there or no?
Yeah, we're fine.
It's like a robotic voice, but check it out.
Here's a summary of what you do for a living. What do you do?
Oh, nice. Good call. It's okay. I think she's just saying the same thing.
A resume generally is written in fragmented English headings, therefore not ideal demonstration of writing skills. Confidence. Your resume often is a reflection of your self-confidence.
Look at that
People
face.
who struggle with writing their own resumes must rely on friends and professional resume writers to pull together a document that makes them look good on paper.
Short and sweet.
Writing and updating your resume forces you to take inventory of your skills, education, and work history. In doing so and comparing this inventory with your professional goals, you can identify the areas where you need to improve and the areas where you have been successful.
So in terms of one thing that I've learned, I'm 28, And I've had essentially a couple jobs, not many. There's still some dream jobs of mine that I haven't yet fulfilled or haven't gotten to that level yet.
Are you having a hard time knowing exactly what to write?
Sorry. Is this it? Ooh, no, open with Google Slides. Sorry, it's like we out of whack. This should work. One tip that I will give, sorry that video was kind of generic, but one tip that I will give is that if you're really interested in a particular career or job, for instance, like you have a good understanding of an industry and like perhaps you want to become a physical therapy because you really like healthcare or helping people, or if engineering is interesting to you, or construction, you like math and understanding how things are built. Essentially, if you have an understanding of what industry piques your interest, one of my tips that I've learned is really useful is go to a company that you think is really awesome and you kind of understand what they do and you believe in what they do, and look at some of the jobs within that particular industry. They're all online. They're very public. And look at the resumes of the individuals in those current jobs. Most times it's not a true resume with one document, maybe double-sided. It's not that sweet layout because they're not going to have that professional resume on LinkedIn or on their board of directors or job leadership team board. But you'll be able to find out some of their qualities, and I think it's really interesting for me. Like for instance, I want to work for the Oakland Raiders one day. I want to work like on the business side, right? The business aspect of sports and football. And so if I were to look at the player personnel directors for the Oakland Raiders right now, they have a long list of things that they've accomplished. And I need to begin to kind of look at, if I really want to align myself for that job in 10 or 5 years or whatever it is, I need to make sure that I'm filling all those buckets. You know what I mean? Like I need to make sure, like if I want to get here, I'm going to figure out what that includes and kind of work my way backwards. Because jobs like that, they just don't happen. It just doesn't, you don't just wake up and just begin working for Facebook. There's kind of a checkbox system you have to start out with. So yeah, that's something that I think is important. And like I said, you guys are able to go online right now and check it out. Why is it, sorry for the tech troubles. If you can just get me to the presentation mode, I'm not as familiar with the, yeah. Does anyone, just for kicks, does anyone have an understanding of like, hey, one day if I had a dream job, what would it be, Armand? Like if you can have any job in the world, something you think is fun, whether it makes a lot of money or not, what job? Just curious. I'd like to hear some thoughts. He's ready.
Judge Advocates General Officer in the Air Force.
Oh, geez. Yes, sir, Captain. Dude, you're on top of it. I like it. But no, I like it. That's something that's really appealing to you, and it seems like a dream job. No, that's awesome. And Armand, anything ever pique your interest? Like one day I want to be...
Oh, I like to own my own business. Like,
own your own business? Yeah, that's a start. What kind of business? Any sense?
Nothing particularly yet.
No? Okay. Just what's something fun? I mean, who knows if we'll ever...
I know, like an aerospace engineer at like NASA or SpaceX.
Cool. Aerospace engineer. Nice. I like it. That's a good one. Yeah, I like that one a lot. That's a good one. So any Seamus? And it's fun. Sometimes it's embarrassing to kind of share those things, but I gave you guys my Oakland Raider treat.
Work as an investment banker and then retire and be a collegiate professor.
Ooh, I dig it. That's cool.
Like something to do with engineering and business. Maybe have my own company someday.
Okay. Nice. Anything else? Anything fun that you ever like? Anything just for kicks? Yeah.
Probably surgeon.
The surgeon? Nice.
I wouldn't mind being a food critique for a while. Just like going out eating food and getting paid for it.
Nice, man. Hey, that's a good gig,
Just like a fun thing for a year.
Yeah, I'm not gonna lie, dude. I would love that sort of gig too. That's fun. Do you leave Yelp reviews? Are you working on it? And just like,
I haven't like.
what's your Yelp level at right now?
0. I don't even have like an account.
Oh, dude,
Just
you gotta
like,
get your Yelp game up. No, good stuff. Nice. Well, we'll jump right into this. We already got an overview of what resumes are and the importance of them. This is kind of a more detailed checklist of the 10 steps of creating a resume. So it is going to be more text heavy. I'll kind of refer to this more often than I should, just to stay on track. But yeah, I think it's important, like I said, at any age to begin understanding what a resume is and how it works. most times what I've learned too, having a resume handy is really important. I mentioned that it's nice to have a more targeted focus of a resume, but essentially just having one handy, because you never really know when the opportunity to pass a resume to somebody that might open the door for something, you never know when that comes, right? So for me, for instance, like in high school, towards the end of high school, like my senior year, and then college, I always kept my resume like in my car. Like I learned it through like an ex-girlfriend or something, but she would always keep her resume in her car because she wouldn't know who she would end up meeting or her dad's friend or her mom's friend or something. And it's just kind of nice and it looks organized and prepared, like, oh, cool. Like we had just talked about your job interests and a prospective employer said, yeah, that'd be cool. I'd love to kind of learn more about you. And she, boom, there's the resume, right? So there's things like that in terms of having a resume that's updated, and also just being young individuals who have been working are going to want to love to see somebody who's organized and prepared and driven, right? That's something that they're going to want to see. So like I said, that's another great way to kind of get things going. Design factors of resumes in order to differentiate yourself. It's really important to have your own resume look. There's a template to how resumes not necessarily should look, but what information they should include. There's kind of a template for that, right? For instance, you're always going to want to have your name on your resume, right? But in terms of the font that you use, that's ultimately up to you. There's no yes or no font question. If you're working for a market, if you're interested in marketing, if you're interested in something that has a little bit more creativity elements included in it, you're going to want to include a font, for instance, of your resume that has maybe a more unique feel to it. If you're, yeah.
So it's like, you're saying it's okay maybe for some resumes to have like a Comic Sans type of font? Maybe?
Yeah, it's okay to be a little bit more creative, right? You want to make sure your resume is clear and legible and you can read it. But if you're working as a graphic designer, for instance, and that's the field you want to pursue, you want to design logos for sports companies or those type of clients, they're going to want to see you become a little bit more creative with your resume. So that's something to pay attention to. Whereas if you're interested in a field that's more traditional, whether it's being a surgeon, they're going to want to kind of see something that's a little bit more typical, something that's easy to read and follow. So, but what's important is that the resume reflects who you are, right, and is extremely factual. There's many cases too that people have been fired because what they had on their resume did not quite align with what they actually had inside their head. Right, the knowledge that they possessed while doing the job was much different than what they advertised. And so an employer certainly is capable of saying, hey, it's been 2 months on the job. You're clearly not you mentioned that you type 100 words per minute. You mentioned, Microsoft Illustrator, Photoshop, whatever it is, and you clearly don't. Like, we've put a project on your table before, it sat there on your table. That's an issue, right? So in terms of being able to back up your resume, that's really important. So I would say, yeah, it's okay to, I don't want to say add fluff, but it's okay to kind of highlight some things maybe you're not as strong at in your resume. It's okay to kind of include those things, but you just got to make sure, you got to be extremely kind of careful with what you're capable of doing and actually what you actually put on paper, because sometimes that could be a deciding factor for somebody to hire you, which would ultimately be a bad thing, or somebody to let you go because you didn't express how you weren't competent in a certain area. So I don't know too many situations of my friends of that happening to them, but it's definitely, it will cause tension if you do get the job. Then there'll be some issues that you just wouldn't want to work with. So the 10 steps, these are some things that I think would be really important for you guys to know kind of along the way. I mentioned this one here. Find out the skills, knowledge, and experience needed to do that target job, right? Remember, go to the company, figure out what the job includes, and if you have that interest and skill set that's aligned with that particular job, creating that resume is going to be fairly easy. It's going to be pretty simple. If you don't have a direct connection to the job skills and requirements, you're going to have to kind of go to that job skills requirements page and really figure out which skills you have that are included on there, and kind of really be more strategic with creating that resume for that particular skill. I think most jobs, like the bottom, the second to the last bullet point, most jobs you work, they have a sense, they'll provide a skill set for you that you may not know, kind of that won't be as obvious, but keep in mind that regardless of what job you're doing, whether you're wrapping hot dogs for a concession game or working in a lab or doing TA work for an English class, prepping stuff, like every job has some really cool, valuable skill sets. Sometimes you're just gonna have to dig deeper a little bit and create an attractive way of saying it, right? You know what I mean? In terms of just hot dog, wrapper that doesn't seem very complicated, but you can spin it on an angle of like you understand how to keep inventory and manage, cash in real time during. So there's ways that you can kind of spin it in the sense of creating a really cool skill set, which I think is really important. So. So in terms of the resume itself, multiple ways of going about listing it, but typically there's a chronological order involved with it. So it's kind of going from most recent jobs to, and then kind of going down from there. I think, or if you start with the previous jobs, which isn't as common of a thing, that's fine, but it's certainly going to be something that that you want to just keep consistent throughout. So that's important to note too, that you'll see kind of a timeline sort of effect with most jobs or with most resumes. I think I hit on a couple other things. Somewhere key points in there, tell me your resume, about 5 short lines. Yeah, I like that. We'll see some example resumes right now. Yeah, I mentioned the idea of a generic resume and a more targeted resume. Employers want to see you spend the time to create a targeted resume. That may, like I say, be that point of I'm going to hire him because he actually referenced the job that he's applying for in his resume, as opposed to a generic resume that didn't have anything. So a lot of students, young students, make the mistake of just creating a generic resume, which is okay to have on hand. But if you're applying for a job that you know exactly what the job is, then you got to take it a step further and just spend a couple of minutes customizing it. And we can go into detail about what that means later. I mentioned this already, so I'm going to breeze past it. List your strongest skills. I think that's really important too. This is a really cool way to go about it, right? So a target job is a customer service representative. Instantly you want to figure out what skills make a successful customer service representative. And if those are the relevant skills, right, you got to make sure you're going to post them in a very clean format and align those skills with that particular position. So I like those examples there. And then accomplishments. So the resume, I had mentioned this too with LinkedIn. Like most times you don't want to be known as a very conceited, selfish individual, especially in the professional workforce. You always want to make sure you're giving credit to others and rarely saying I or I did this or it was my idea. Those sorts of things don't go over well. They don't build team chemistry and so forth. So you should always move forward with that in mind. But in terms of a resume, that is a good opportunity for you to be a little selfish, like in a good way. But it's important for you because as you're competing with other people who've gone through similar situations and a solid education, you want to make sure you're presenting yourself in the best possible light. Right? So really hyping yourself up in a sense and being proud about that. And like the video mentioned, being very confident in the resume instead of being like, oh, I don't know, I just kind of threw this together. No, you want to make sure it kind of lists the most kind of the proud moments of your working career or educational career would be really important. And then these are other solid examples too. So those are. Action statements, yeah, these are solid. Employers want to know that you have problem-solving abilities, and providing clean examples of those, like clear examples of those problem-solving abilities, are really important. I think it's safe to say in most jobs you're always going to come across an obstacle and a problem. I even here today, I get frustrated when I work with individuals who don't provide any solutions for a problem, or they don't provide any concrete, hey, this is what we should do, here's the plan I suggest. I don't like that, because essentially I want people on my team who are constantly providing solutions, who are constantly providing ways for us to tackle a problem. And so being able to explain that this is a good example of you doing so allows the employer to see, okay, this is the type of individual that we're kind of working towards, and so that's important. So in terms of English, right, you guys have concrete details. This page is kind of referencing the accomplishments is, in my opinion, more of a concrete detail, kind of a factual point, right? That you want exactly real world accomplishments or real world responsibilities that you undertook in a particular position. So in terms of, there's not as much fluff here as there is kind of more specific concrete examples of you doing your job and doing it well. So that's important too, to verify, kind of understanding the difference between them. I would say for us, for you guys, again, most of you probably don't have a long job history. Whether it's a volunteer, that's important. What's also important too, I think, is anything education based. Because you're in high school right now, I think the majority of your resume, about 75% of it, should be geared towards your experience here at Bellarmine. So what classes you have taken that you've done really well in, and what things you've learned kind of through those classes. But I think a lot of unless you have a long job history, yeah, go ahead.
Like, if you're like a teacher aide, can you like include that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, teaching your teacher aide, that's huge, right? Because being able to say that you've worked with the teachers side by side to help manage a class of 30 individuals by correcting tests, by whatever it is, taking attendance, I'm not sure whatever it is, but that's important because it shows that you've had a leadership position amongst your peers. Like, you've played a leadership role, which is a really important quality.
Yeah, I mean, on that point, I've been a teacher's aide for Mr. Pinkston in the service department, Mr. Young in the history department, and then next semester I'll be with Mr. Zuniga. So in each of those, you can accomplish concrete things, like you said, and put down those action statements.
Yeah, there's so in terms of that, yeah, I wouldn't be so concerned about trying to find jobs that you guys had. Like raking leaves for a neighbor probably doesn't quite apply as much as like Algebra 2 or World History AP or something like that. So I would say focus more heavily on that. I know the bell's going to ring, so we won't have time to go through example resumes, which would be more helpful for you once you guys have learned kind of the reasons behind them. So it would be hard to find a new short-term art to get some. Yeah, I mentioned the volunteer experience. That's really important. Then we'll cruise. This doesn't quite apply to you if you have gaps in your work, because again, I mean, some people have gaps of like 4 to 5 years, right? And if you guys go back 4 to 5 years, you're like in 7th grade or 6th grade, so it doesn't quite apply because you guys aren't working then. But in terms of gaps, it's important to note you have to be capable to explain why you have a gap. Like, somebody will ask you, like, I noticed you worked at Apple and then Facebook, but it took 1.5 years. Like, what the hell were you doing in that 1.5 years to help benefit you as a person, to help develop you? You should have a good explanation for that because they'll quiz you on that. List training and education, I had mentioned that earlier. In place of job history in high school, it's going to be more important for you to have the training education factors kind of listed. Yeah, it would be nice if we had a couple more minutes to review the different formats. Maybe we can postpone this one for later, because the resume workshop would be a lot more interactive if I had a little bit more time. But I gave you guys kind of a decent overview. We'll finish the rest of the overview, and then we'll also begin to go over, hey, here's this resume. I want you guys to critique it. What do you guys like about it? What do you dislike about it? And then we'll keep showing you kind of a A resume, a B resume, a C, D, E, etc. So you guys have an understanding of, in order for me to do well in a particular position, you guys are going to have to learn how to put together a decent resume, because that's one of the initial steps. So I hope you guys were able to take a little bit of something from today. And then I think we're gone the next couple of weeks. And so we will resume in January. And we may open up with a workshop that's a little bit more interactive. Thanks,
More information will be in the email, so make sure to check those out.